Greetings, YouTube. Buddha Jim here with a follow-up on my latest Ron Paul video. As expected, the Ron Paul minions came out of the woodwork to bash me. But I also received some rather thoughtful comments, in particular a video response from Altimeter88, a new YouTube user, and welcome to YouTube, Altimeter88. Let me start by giving you a specific reason why I would never support Ron Paul. And first, let me just say it would never be just personal reasons. From AFL-CIO blog, Paul became the first presidential candidate to cross the picket line of the Writers Guild yesterday when he appeared on ABC's The View. And this year, Ron Paul voted against the Employee Free Choice Act, which would make it easier for workers to exercise their freedom to form a union. Now, you can kid yourselves all you want that Ron Paul is about the people, but if that were true, he would have never crossed a picket line. Furthermore, his vote against the Employee Free Choice Act is simply reprehensible. There seems to be some confusion about what I said, and more specifically what Noam Chomsky said in regards to corporations and the government. Altimeter88 asks, what corporation has killed more people than the government? He goes on to point out that the government is not a nice, fluffy institution that can be changed. The question says a lot about the assumptions you hold regarding why our government goes to war and who is pulling the strings. The godfather of any mafia probably hasn't killed nearly as many people as the soldiers under him, but in this case we understand the power dynamic better. It's easier to see that the people being killed by the mafia soldier are in effect being killed because of the godfather. In that vein, consider the following excerpt from a speech given by former Major General Smedley Butler of the United States Marine Corps, and I quote, I spent 33 years and 4 months in active military service as a member of this country's most agile military force, the Marine Corps. I served in all commissioned ranks from second lieutenant to major general, and during this period I spent most of my time being a high-class muscle man for big business, for Wall Street, and for the bankers. In short, I was a racketeer, a gangster for capitalism. I helped make Mexico, especially Tampico, safe for American oil interests in 1914. I helped make Haiti and Cuba a decent place for the National City Bank boys to collect revenues in. I helped in raping half a dozen Central American republics for the benefit of Wall Street. The record of racketeering is long. I helped purify Nicaragua for the International Banking House of Brown Brothers in 1909 through 1912, and I brought light to the Dominican Republic for American sugar interests in 1916. In China, I helped to see to it that Standard Oil went its way unmolested. Unquote. You see, the government doesn't murder people around the globe to protect American citizens. It murders and terrorizes people to protect global investment of the Fortune 500. More specifically, some analysts, like Michael Prenny, refer to this as the national security state. Michael Prenny explains.
Within the government, there exists what some have called the national security state. It consists of the President, the Secretaries of State, the Secretary of Defense, the National Security Council, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, which is the military heads of all the various armed forces, and numerous intelligence agencies like the CIA, the FBI, and the NSA. The national security state often operates like an unaccountable sovereign power of its own. Its primary function is to defeat political forces that seek alternatives to free market capitalism, at home or abroad, or even forces that might try to introduce any kind of economically redistributive politics even within the existing capitalist framework.
So, to emphasize, when you ask a question like, what corporation has killed more people than the U.S. government, you're missing the point. The state exists to protect private property. The United States is largely a business-run society. We've not killed nearly 1 million Iraqis for democracy or freedom or even to combat terrorism. We've done it to make Iraq and hopefully the larger Middle East safe for the Fortune 500. The government is not a nice, fluffy institution that can easily be changed, and no one ever said it was. If you listen to what Chomsky said, and has been said for a long time though, it's the one institution that we can potentially change through direct involvement. The key is potential. In fact, we have a long history of doing just that. The labor movement women's rights, civil rights, the environmental protections we all enjoy have all been forced on the government through popular struggle. And if you take a look at any of those movements in any detail, it wasn't easy. Workers were brutally killed, beaten, jailed, and intimidated long before we had any kind of worker rights in this country. If you're looking for easy, vote for Ron Paul. It will accomplish nothing, but it'll be easy. And it's not surprising that you have such a favorable view of corporations. They do, of course, feed us most of the information we get. There's no shortage of people who think Starbucks is a wonderful and progressive company that really cares about its employees and the environment. Yeah, and I've got a bridge to sell you. In your video, you did say take a look at the numbers, but I noticed you didn't mention any numbers, which is usually the case. People just assume that corporations are naturally better, more efficient. I'd urge you to take a look at that. Take a look at the numbers and your underlying assumptions about the nature of the corporation. Compare the administrative costs of a program like Medicare to any private insurance company. Guess who wins? Medicare, by a long shot. Administrative costs for a program like Medicare are about 2%. Private insurance runs anywhere from 20 to 30% and higher. Not even close. But let's look at the supposed failure of Social Security. First off, you make the mistake of referring to it as an investment plan. It's not. It is not an investment plan. Folks, Social Security is not a retirement plan. It is literally a Social Security net to help people from falling through the cracks. The average monthly payout is only about $800 a month. It's not enough to live on, but it supplements a lot of people's income. But by any measure, it is one of the government's most successful programs ever. Consider the following. In 1939, 2/3 of American senior citizens lived their golden years in cold, hard poverty. Just a decade later, that percentage was down to half. By 1959, it was only 1/3. Today, the number is less than 10%. And again, Social Security Administration costs amount to less than 2%. Try finding that in the private sector where the average is 20 to 30%. Finally, let's look at the great example of corporate justice at hand, Enron. If you think Enron is a great example of justice or what happens to bad corporations, I'd suggest you don't know much about the case. Consider the following from the reporter Greg Palast being interviewed by Amy Goodman on Democracy Now! But this was not just Enron. One thing we had to get clear here, we're talking about an entire mob, not two guys, not even one company. The same calls were made by Duke Power to San Diego Gas and Electric. We had a whole gang, Resilient, Dye Energy, El Paso, Duke Energy. These guys were all working in coordination. Public Services of New Mexico, and they were playing games with the power market. They were running it like a fixed casino, and yet only one company went down and only two guys. And they weren't even allowed to bring up the California power plant markets in its trial, so that basically the Bush Justice Department did its very best to keep the real crimes and the whole mob out of the courtroom, because it would have brought it right back, of course, to the Bush administration. And how was justice served? The $9 billion swindled from Californians? Never repaid. The majority of people involved in the scandal were never even bothered with, and essentially two people get the whip. That's justice? And so I ask you, what was the purpose of our government according to our founding fathers? I'll tell you. According to James Madison at the Constitutional Convention, the purpose of this government is to protect the minority of the opulent from the majority. That's what Ron Paul supports. That's what Ron Paul believes in. And it's reflected in everything he says and does, from crossing picket lines to voting against the right of workers to organize and form unions. He is looking out for the rich, for the minority of the opulent. So if you want to say he's pro-government, that's fine, as long as it's understood that his idea of the role of government, laid down by our slave-owning, aristocratic founding fathers, was to protect the rich from the poor, the haves from the have-nots, who, according to Madison in Federalist Paper No. 10, feared that a majority faction might someday want a more equitable distribution of